Today we're going to talk about how to solve radical equations. So I have a radical equation here. Square root of 2x minus 4 equals x minus 6. To get rid of this radical, we have to square both sides. So after I do that, the radical goes away here, and you end up with x minus 6 squared over here. Now you have a binomial, and it's squared, which does not mean I can distribute this square onto both, making it x squared minus 36. It means I have to write it out twice. So I get 2x minus 4 on the left here, and x minus 6 times x minus 6. So just remember that when you square something, it means you multiply it by itself, so you have to write it out twice. After I do that, I will distribute, or FOIL, as some of you may have learned. You end up with this, x squared minus 6x minus 6x plus 36. And then I'm just going to combine my like terms on the right hand side there. So I get x squared minus 12x plus 36. And now I notice that I have a quadratic because of the squared function. With a quadratic, you have to get 0 on one side, which means I have to subtract this 2x and then add the 4 over. And when I do that, I get 0 on the left equals x squared minus 14x plus 40. And then from here, we've learned 3 different ways to solve these. We can graph it, you can factor it, or use the quadratic formula. I think factoring is easier, and when you're at home, you don't have a graphing calculator probably, so you can factor it. When I factor it, I get something like this. I have a times c at the top, so that's 40, and b is negative 14 down here. So I listed out my factors, and you'll notice that I also have the negatives, because remember, negative times a negative does give you a positive, and when I add two negatives, I get another negative, so I know I'm going to want to use this side with the negatives. So negative 4 times negative 10 is a positive 40, and they do add to give you negative 14. So then I write it like this, x minus 4 equals, or times x minus 10 equals 0. Scoot this up a little bit. Since that equals 0, I set each side equal to 0, each factor, and solve. So x is 4, and x is also 10. We'll do one more. There we go. Alright, so we have the square root of 4r minus 4 plus 4 equals r. And notice, this positive 4 here is not inside the radical. So in order to get the radical by itself, because I need to get rid of it, I have to subtract this 4 over. Again, I need to get this radical by itself, so I subtract the 4. I end up like this. And then now that I have a radical, I have to square both sides to get rid of that radical. And again, when I square something, I multiply it by itself, so that means I have to write it out twice. So I have r minus 4 times r minus 4, and that equals 4r minus 4. Notice I haven't done anything with the left side here yet. Then I have to distribute out the right side here, so I get r squared minus 4r plus 16. And then I'm just going to combine my like terms and set everything equal to 0 on one side. I did all that in one step. So we got minus 4r is a minus 8r. And then when I subtract this 4r over, that gives me a negative 12r. And then if I add that 4 to the 16, that gives me 20. So that's where that comes from. I just combined everything at once and then moved it over. Again, I moved it over because I need this equal to 0 because I'm solving a quadratic. And again, I chose to factor. And when I factor here, I have 20 at the top, that's a times c. b is negative 12. So I list the factors. And again, you can't have negatives, remember, because two negatives do make a positive, and two negatives when you add give you a bigger negative. So I end up with negative 10 and negative 2 as my factors. So I write down x minus 10, or this should be r minus 10, and r minus 2 equals 0. So r must equal 10, and r must equal 2, after you set both sides equal to 0. And that's how you solve that's how you solve radical equations that turn into quadratics.